A young girl sees a millionaire and a baby about to be attacked by a venomous snake. Then she does something shocking. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and let me know what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The dirt road snaked through the Appalachian Mountains like a golden scar in the late afternoon, carrying the scent of damp earth from the morning rain. Emily walked barefoot along the edge, her small feet dodging mud puddles as she searched for something to eat. At 4 years old, she already knew every stone, every curve of that road that connected the historic town of Stone Creek to the neighboring hamlets. Her tangled brown hair bounced as she moved, her large dark eyes always alert for any sign of danger or opportunity. The roar of the engine arrived before she could see the car. It was a different sound from the mining trucks that constantly passed by, smoother, more refined. Emily hid behind an old oak tree, watching the golden vehicle descend the road at a speed far too high for those treacherous curves. The man at the wheel seemed nervous, constantly looking in the rearview mirror as if he were fleeing from something. The crash echoed through the mountains like a thunderclap. Emily saw the car flip twice before landing on its side in a ditch on the roadside, the crumpled metal smoking under the sun. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then the crying began, a sharp, desperate sound that made the little girl's heart race. Without thinking of the consequences, Emily ran toward the accident. The crying came from inside the car, where she could see a baby seat strapped in the back. A man in a dark suit was unconscious in the front seat, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. But it was the movement on the ground that terrified her. A coral snake, its bright red and black bands shimmering in the sun, was slithering slowly toward the wreckage. Emily knew these snakes well. She had learned on the streets that their bites were fatal, especially to children. She grabbed a thick branch that had broken off during the crash and began to beat the ground with all the force her small hands could muster. The noise echoed through the valley, making the snake stop and raise its head, as if assessing the new threat. "Go away!" she shouted, continuing to strike the branch against the rocks. "Get out of here!" The snake slowly moved away, disappearing among the stones. Only then did Emily approach the car. The baby was crying even harder, his tiny fists trembling in the air. She didn't know how to get the child out of the car seat, but she began to softly sing a song she vaguely remembered hearing, trying to calm the little one while looking around for help. The man in the front seat began to groan, moving his head slightly. Emily touched his arm gently. "Mister, wake up. The baby's crying." Mr. Harrison Blackwood opened his eyes slowly, his vision blurry and his head throbbing with pain. The first thing he saw was the dirty face of a little girl, her large eyes full of concern. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then Leo's cries brought him back to reality. "My grandson," he murmured, trying to move in the cramped seat. "He's okay," Emily said, pointing to the back. "He's just scared. The snake is gone now." "Snake?" Harrison felt a shiver run down his spine. Slowly, he managed to untangle himself from the seat and see Leo trapped in the car seat, red from crying but apparently unharmed. When he turned to thank the girl who had warned him of the danger, she was gone. Emily had disappeared among the trees, like an apparition. Harrison managed to free his grandson from the car seat and stumbled to the road, where a truck finally stopped to help them. During the entire drive to the hospital in Stone Creek, he couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious girl who had appeared out of nowhere to save them. At the hospital, while the doctors examined Leo and treated the wound on his forehead, Harrison reported the accident to a nurse. When he mentioned the girl, she frowned. "That must be little Emily," she said sadly. "She's been living on the streets since her parents disappeared in the flood 3 years ago. She's a smart kid, but very wild. No one can seem to take proper care of her." She saved our lives, Harrison said, holding Leo in his arms. If it weren't for her, that snake could have. He couldn't finish the sentence. The realization of how close they had come to tragedy hit him with full force. A 4-year-old girl had shown more courage and presence of mind than he, an experienced businessman, could have mustered in the same situation. That night, alone in his hotel room while Leo slept in the portable crib beside him, Harrison made a decision that would change his life forever. He had to find that girl. He had to thank her properly. And for some reason he didn't yet fully understand. He felt he couldn't just move on and forget what had happened. The next morning, he began his search. He walked the stone streets of Stone Creek, talked to shopkeepers, and visited the central square where children used to play. But Emily had vanished again, as if she had never existed. The only clue to her presence was the memory of those big, sad eyes, and the absolute certainty that he owed his life and his grandson's to that brave child who lived in the shadows of the historic town. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and Harrison's obsession with finding Emily had become the center of his existence. He had postponed important meetings in Charleston, cancelled appointments with investors, and practically abandoned the daily management of his mining companies. Every morning, after leaving Leo with the nanny at the hotel, he methodically scoured the streets of Stone Creek, carrying a photo he had commissioned from a local artist based on his description. The search had taken him to the most forgotten corners of the historic town. He spoke with scrap collectors, homeless people, street kids, anyone who might have seen a small, dark-haired girl living alone. Some said they had seen her near the old abandoned train station. Others swore she slept under the bridge over St. Francis Creek. But every time Harrison arrived at the indicated locations, he found only traces: a small, extinguished fire, tiny footprints in the mud, leftover food that someone had shared with stray animals. The frustration was consuming Harrison in a way he hadn't experienced since the early years of struggling to establish his business. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper of his Charleston mansion for over 20 years, had traveled to Stone Creek at his request to care for Leo while he intensified the search. A 58-year-old woman with gray hair always tied in a neat bun, Mrs. Gable knew Harrison well enough to realize that this search had become something far beyond gratitude. "Mr. Blackwood," she said one morning, as she prepared coffee in the small hotel kitchenette, "you need to understand that this girl may not want to be found. Children who live on the streets develop very strong survival instincts. She might be hiding on purpose." Harrison stopped reviewing the town map he had marked with small red X's on all the places he had already searched. "Mrs. Gable, she's 4 years old. 4. She can't be living alone on the streets like this. It's inhumane. And what do you plan to do when you find her?" Mrs. Gable asked gently. "Have you thought about that?" The question hit Harrison like a punch. He had been so focused on finding Emily that he hadn't properly considered what would happen next. He only knew that he couldn't forget those big, sad eyes, nor the courage that such a small child had shown to save 2 lives. "I'll take care of her," he said finally. "I'll give her everything she needs: education, safety, love. It's the least I can do." Mrs. Gable nodded slowly, but her furrowed brows revealed her concern. She had seen many difficult situations during her years working for wealthy families and knew that good intentions didn't always lead to happy endings. It was on that very day that luck finally smiled on Harrison. Returning from another frustrating morning of searching, he decided to take a different path back to the hotel. He passed by the old stone bridge that crossed St. Francis Creek, an 18th century structure connecting the historic center to the poorer neighborhoods on the outskirts. The sun was setting, painting the dark waters of the creek with golden hues, when he heard a sound that made his heart stop. It was a child's voice singing softly, a sad melody echoing from under the bridge. Harrison carefully descended the steep bank, holding onto the moss-covered stones. Down below, huddled in a corner formed by the support pillars, was Emily. She was even thinner than he remembered, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, pulled tight against her chest. She wore the same dirty t-shirt from the day of the accident, now even more torn and stained. Beside her, a small, scruffy mutt with brown fur slept, clearly her only companion in this lonely life. "Emily," Harrison said softly, trying not to startle her. The girl looked up abruptly, her eyes widening with surprise and fear. For a moment, she recognized him. It was the man from the car, the one who had been hurt in the accident. But instead of approaching, she shrank further against the stone wall, hugging the dog, which had woken up and started to growl softly. "I'm not going to hurt you," Harrison said, crouching down to her level. "Do you remember me? You helped me when my car crashed. You saved my life and my grandson's." Emily nodded slightly but didn't relax her defensive posture. "Are you okay?" she asked in her small, hoarse voice. "And the baby?" "We're fine, thanks to you," Harrison replied, a lump forming in his throat. "I came looking for you to thank you, and to ask you an important question." Emily tilted her head, curious despite her fear. "Would you like to come live with me? I have a big house with comfortable rooms, food every day, toys. You would never have to sleep on the street or go hungry again." Emily's reaction was instant and unexpected. She began to shake her head vigorously, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't go." "Why not?" Harrison asked, confused by the rejection. "Because they're coming back," Emily whispered, her voice broken with fear. "My daddy said if I left here, they wouldn't be able to find me when they came back. They promised they'd come back." Harrison's heart shattered. The girl still believed that her parents, who had been missing for 3 years, would return for her. She had spent all this time wandering the streets of Stone Creek, sustained only by the hope of a reunion that would likely never happen. "Emily," he said gently, "how long have your parents been gone?" "A long time," she admitted, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "But they promised. Daddy said the flood would pass, and they would come get me. He told me to be strong and wait." Harrison realized it would take much more than a conversation to convince Emily to accept his help. The girl had built her emotional survival around the hope of her parents' return, and shattering that fantasy could be more harmful than beneficial. "What if you just came for dinner tonight?" he suggested. "Not to stay, just for a warm meal. You could come back here afterward if you want." Emily considered the offer, her stomach rumbling audibly. She'd only eaten some scraps she found in a restaurant's trash that morning. The dog beside her also looked thin and hungry. "Can he come too?" she asked, pointing to the animal. "Of course," Harrison replied, smiling for the first time in weeks. "What's his name?" "Buddy," Emily said simply. "He showed up when I was very sad, and he's stayed with me ever since." Harrison slowly extended his hand. After a few moments of hesitation, Emily took it. Her skin was rough and dirty, but the touch sent a wave of paternal protection through Harrison's chest that he hadn't felt since his own son had passed away years ago. Walking back through the historic center, Emily stayed close but alert, her eyes constantly scanning for escape routes. Buddy the dog followed them, keeping himself between Emily and Harrison like a loyal bodyguard. It was obvious they had both learned not to trust adults easily. At the hotel, Mrs. Gable welcomed Emily with the warm hospitality that had characterized her decades of caring for children. She prepared a warm bath and found some clothes she had bought for Leo that fit Emily. During dinner, the girl ate with a voracity that revealed days of hunger, but also with surprisingly delicate manners that suggested an upbringing before the streets. "Where did you learn to behave so well at the table?" Mrs. Gable asked gently. "Mommy taught me," Emily replied, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. "She said polite girls always know how to act, no matter where they are." When it was time for Emily to go back to the bridge, as they had agreed, she had relaxed enough to accept some extra clothes and food for Buddy. Harrison walked her back, promising he would return the next day. "Are you really coming back?" Emily asked, suspicion returning to her voice. "I promise," Harrison said, "and unlike some people, I keep my promises." That night, alone in his room, Harrison made a decision that would change not only his life, but also define the kind of man he chose to be. No matter how long it took, he would earn Emily's trust and give her the family she deserved. But first, he needed to find out the truth about what had really happened to her parents. As he suspected, the story of the flood hid secrets far darker than he had imagined. 2 months had passed since Harrison began visiting Emily daily at the bridge. Slowly, the girl's initial mistrust had given way to cautious acceptance. She now allowed him to take her to lunch at small restaurants in town and even agreed to sleep at the hotel on particularly cold nights, always on the condition that she could return to the bridge in the morning to wait for Mommy and Daddy. During these meetings, Harrison had learned disturbing fragments about Emily's past. She remembered men in suits visiting her house repeatedly before her parents disappeared, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room, and the increasingly worried expression that had taken over her parents' faces in the weeks leading up to the fateful night of the flood. "Daddy used to stare out the window for a long time," she had told him one afternoon, while playing with Leo in the hotel garden. "He told Mommy that the bad men wouldn't give up, that they needed to protect our land." These revelations had awakened a deep unease in Harrison. As a mining industry entrepreneur, he knew well the pressures that small landowners faced when large corporations wanted to expand their operations. The Stone Creek region was rich in diamonds and other precious minerals, and negotiations for land acquisition didn't always follow ethical methods. It was during one of these afternoons that Harrison received a call that would change everything. It was Robert Shaw, his accountant and financial advisor for over 15 years, with devastating news about his company's situation. "Harrison, we need to talk urgently," Robert said, his voice tense. "There are serious irregularities being investigated in our Stone Creek operation. The district attorney is questioning our environmental licenses, and there are allegations of questionable methods in the acquisition of some lands." Harrison's blood ran cold. "What kind of questionable methods?" "Intimidation of families, forged documents, bribes to municipal officials. The evidence points to practices that could result in the loss of all our licenses in the region." Harrison hung up the phone with trembling hands. For years, he had entrusted the operational management of his mining company to Stephen Croft, his partner and old college friend. Stephen was responsible for land negotiations and community relations, while Harrison focused on the financial and strategic side of the business. Now he was discovering that his trust may have been betrayed irreparably. That night, Emily noticed the change in Harrison's behavior. During dinner at the hotel, he was distant, picking at his food, clearly lost in troubled thoughts. "Are you sad, Uncle Harry?" she asked, using the nickname she had started calling him. Harrison forced a smile. "Just worried about some work stuff, little one." "Daddy used to get like that too," Emily said, her voice growing quieter. "When the bad men came to talk to him about our yard, he said they wanted to take our house away." The connection hit Harrison like a bolt of lightning. "Emily, do you remember what these men looked like? What they wore?" Emily frowned, concentrating to retrieve memories from 3 years ago. One of them was chubby, always in a blue suit. He had a scar on his forehead. The other was thinner, talked really loud, and had a very big gold ring. The description of the first man was unmistakably Stephen Croft. Harrison had seen that scar on his forehead hundreds of times, the result of a car accident in his youth that Stephen never tired of recounting. The second man could be Victor Stone, a middleman who often worked with Stephen on land deals. The realization was devastating. His own company, under his partner's management, had been involved in the pressure that forced Emily's family to abandon their property. Her parents hadn't disappeared in a natural flood. They had been forced to flee by men who worked for him. Harrison spent the night awake, pacing the hotel room as he processed the magnitude of his discovery. Not only had he been unknowingly involved in Emily's suffering, but his entire fortune could have been built on the ruin of innocent families like hers. The next morning, he left Emily in Mrs. Gable's care and drove immediately to Charleston, where he scheduled an emergency meeting with Stephen. The mining company's office occupied 2 floors of a modern commercial building in the city center, overlooking the mountains that surrounded the state capital. Stephen Croft was at his desk when Harrison walked in, reviewing documents with the efficiency that had always characterized his work. A 42-year-old man, slightly overweight, with thinning hair, he greeted Harrison with the confident smile he had cultivated over years of successful negotiations. "Harrison, what a surprise to see you here. I thought you were still in Stone Creek handling those personal matters." "I'm here because of personal matters," Harrison said, closing the door behind him. "And because Robert told me about the investigations." Stephen's smile wavered slightly. "Ah, that. It's just a bureaucratic formality, some government officials trying to justify their salaries with unnecessary investigations. Stephen, I need you to tell me the truth about how we acquired the lands in Stone Creek over the last 5 years." "The truth?" Stephen laughed, but the sound was forced. "The truth is, we made excellent deals, bought properties at fair prices, and expanded our operation profitably. What's the problem?" "The problem," Harrison said, approaching the desk, "is that a 4-year-old girl has spent the last 3 years living on the streets because her family was forced to abandon their property by men working for our company." Stephen's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about intimidation, threats, document forgery. I'm talking about practices that have turned our company into something I no longer recognize." Stephen stood up, his posture becoming defensive. "Harrison, you've always known this business requires tough decisions. You can't build a business empire by being naive about how the real world works." "Naive?" Harrison's voice rose. "You call having ethical principles naive? I call it naive to think you can compete in this industry without getting your hands dirty occasionally," Stephen retorted. "All the major mining companies do it. It's part of the game." "Then I don't want to be part of this game anymore." Stephen laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you develop a conscience? After years of profiting from my work, suddenly you want to be the saint of the story. I want to correct the mistakes we've made. Our mistakes." Stephen stepped closer, his eyes glinting with a hostility Harrison had never seen before. "You lived in your ivory tower in Charleston, focusing on numbers and profit margins, while I did the dirty work of ensuring we had land to operate on. You never asked questions about my methods when the profits rolled in." The accusation hit Harrison deeply because it contained a painful truth. He had indeed chosen not to ask questions, had preferred comfortable ignorance to the unpleasant details of how his successes were achieved. "You're right," Harrison admitted. "I was an accomplice by omission. But now I'm going to fix it." "And how do you plan to do that without destroying everything we've built?" "If it's necessary to destroy everything, then let it be destroyed." Stephen studied Harrison's face for a few moments, clearly evaluating how serious his partner was about this moral awakening. Then his expression turned cold and calculating. "Harrison, you don't understand the implications of what you're suggesting. If we start admitting irregularities, it won't just be our company that goes down. There are other people involved, politicians, public officials, other business leaders. You'll be opening a can of worms that can destroy much more than just us. Let it destroy." "And Emily's family?" Stephen said, playing his final card. "If you expose our operations, any chance of finding her parents will disappear forever. The people who forced them to flee might decide it's safer to ensure they never resurface." The implicit threat made Harrison step back. He hadn't considered that his search for the truth could endanger the very people he was trying to protect. But looking at Stephen's calculating expression, he realized that his former friend and partner had become someone he no longer recognized, and perhaps had never really known. "This conversation isn't over," Harrison said, heading for the door. "No," Stephen agreed, "but I hope that when we continue, you'll have carefully considered the consequences of your choices." Driving back to Stone Creek, Harrison felt the weight of impossible decisions on his shoulders. How could he do justice for Emily without potentially condemning her to never see her parents again? How could he live with himself knowing his fortune was built on the suffering of innocent families? And most importantly, how could he protect the girl who had saved his life when she found out he was, in part, responsible for destroying hers? 4 months had passed since the confrontation with Stephen, and Harrison had made the hardest decision of his life. Against all advice from his lawyers and Robert's desperation, he had initiated a full internal investigation of his company, cooperating openly with the authorities and providing all the evidence he could gather about his ex-partner's irregular practices. The consequence was devastating. Blackwood Mining lost its main licenses, faced million-dollar fines, and had to lay off over 200 employees. Harrison saw his fortune shrink to a fraction of what it had been, but every night he could sleep a little better, knowing he was doing the right thing. During these months, Emily had finally agreed to live in the house Harrison had rented in Stone Creek, a simple but comfortable residence in the historic center, where she could maintain her routine of watching the bridge every day, waiting for her parents' return. Mrs. Gable had temporarily moved in to care for Emily and Leo, creating a family atmosphere the girl had never known. But it was through long nightly conversations with Mrs. Gable that Emily began to reveal crucial details about the night her parents disappeared. It hadn't been during a flood, as everyone believed. In fact, her mother had woken her up in the middle of the night, whispering that they had to leave immediately. "Mommy was crying a lot," Emily had recounted, hugging Buddy the dog on the living room sofa. "She said the bad men were coming back in the morning, and if we didn't leave, they would hurt everyone." "And what happened next?" Mrs. Gable asked gently. "Daddy took me to the bridge and told me to hide there until they came back. He said it was a game, that I had to be very brave and wait without making a sound. Then they drove away, and I never saw them again." The revelation broke Harrison's heart. Emily's parents hadn't simply abandoned their daughter. They had been forced to make the impossible choice between protecting her by hiding her or risking everyone being harmed by the pressures they faced. Armed with this information, Harrison decided to confront Stephen one last time, but when he arrived at the office in Charleston, he discovered that his former partner had disappeared, taking a considerable amount of company money and all the files related to the questionable negotiations of recent years. "He fled the country," Robert informed him, clearly shaken by the events. "He only left this letter for you." Harrison opened the envelope with trembling hands. The message was brief and revealing. "Harrison, you chose to destroy everything we built for a street kid. I hope your clear conscience keeps you warm when you have nothing left. As for the girl's parents, they're alive, but if you keep asking questions, I can't guarantee they'll stay that way. Some stones are best left unturned. S." The explicit threat made Harrison realize he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than he had imagined. But it also gave him the first real confirmation that Emily's parents were alive, somewhere, likely in hiding and afraid to return. That night, Harrison made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to investigate secretly, he decided to tell Emily the whole truth. The girl, now 4.5, had matured greatly during the months of living in safety, and he believed she deserved to know the reality of her situation. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something very important," he said, sitting beside her in the garden where she often drew birds in the dirt with twigs. "Is it about Mommy and Daddy?" she asked, with the sharp intuition she had developed over years of surviving alone. "Yes, little one, it is." Harrison told her everything, about his company, about Stephen, about how business pressures had forced her parents to flee, and about his own indirect responsibility in what had happened. He expected Emily to be angry, to blame him, to reject his help. Instead, she remained silent for long minutes, processing the information with a seriousness that seemed impossible in someone so young. "Uncle Harry," she said finally, "did you know the bad men were hurting families?" "No, Emily, I didn't know. But I should have asked. I should have paid attention. Daddy always said that good people sometimes do bad things without meaning to," she said, taking his hand in her two small ones. "But what matters is what they do when they find out." Emily's simple wisdom and unconditional forgiveness almost made Harrison cry. At that moment, he knew that no matter how much money he lost or how many difficulties he faced, he would do everything to reunite this special girl with her family. It was then that Mrs. Gable had an idea that would prove crucial. "Mr. Blackwood, what if instead of looking for Emily's parents, we made them find us?" "How so?" "Let's tell her story in the local newspapers, on the radio. If they're in hiding but alive, they might be following the news from the region. When they know she's safe and well cared for, they might have the courage to come back." The strategy worked beyond their most optimistic expectations. 3 weeks after the first story about the brave girl who saved lives and found a new family was published in the main Stone Creek newspaper, Harrison received a call that changed everything. "Hello, is this about the girl in the story?" A hesitant female voice said. "Emily, does she have a heart-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder?" Harrison's heart stopped. "Yes, she does." "And does she sing a song about little birds when she's sad?" "She does." A muffled sob came from the other end of the line. "I'm Anna, Emily's mother. My husband Charles and we had to leave her to protect her. We've been in hiding for 3 years, but when we saw the story—" "Where are you?" Harrison asked, barely able to control his emotion. "In Maple Hollow, using different names, working on a farm. We're afraid to come back, but we can't stand being away from her anymore." "Come today," Harrison said. "I guarantee your safety. I have contacts who can protect you properly." The reunion between Emily and her parents was the most emotional moment Harrison had ever witnessed. Anna and Charles arrived at dusk, thin and aged by suffering, but with their eyes shining with hope. When Emily saw the familiar silhouette at the door, she ran as she had never run before, shouting, "Mommy! Daddy!" with a joy that echoed throughout the neighborhood. The tears, the hugs, the words of love and regret mixed in a scene that touched the hearts of everyone present. Mrs. Gable cried quietly in the kitchen. Leo babbled excitedly in his nanny's arms, and even Buddy, Emily's faithful dog, seemed to understand the magnitude of the moment. But it was during the conversation that followed that the biggest surprise was revealed. Charles, Emily's father, had worked as an independent geologist, and his research had uncovered one of the largest diamond reserves ever documented in the region, exactly on the land Stephen had so desperately wanted to acquire. "They offered a lot of money at first," Charles explained. "When we refused, the threat started. They said if we didn't sell peacefully, it would be the hard way. We had to run to protect our family." Harrison realized there was a poetic justice in the fact that his own financial ruin had resulted in this family's reunion. His company had lost access to that valuable reserve precisely because of the unethical practices that had separated Emily from her parents. In the months that followed, Harrison helped Emily's family legally establish themselves in Stone Creek, using his contacts to ensure their protection from any retaliation from Stephen or his associates. With what was left of his fortune, he established a small fund to help other families who had been harmed by his former company's practices. Emily, now reunited with her parents but also deeply attached to Harrison and Mrs. Gable, divided her time between the two families. On weekends, she would visit the house where she had found safety and love, playing with Leo and helping Mrs. Gable in the kitchen. During the week, she lived with Anna and Charles, rediscovering the family love she thought she had lost forever. A year after the reunion, Emily asked a question that revealed her growing wisdom. "Uncle Harry, are you sad because you lost your money to help us?" Harrison, who at that moment was tending his own garden in the simple house where he now lived, smiled and hugged the girl who had transformed his life. "Emily, you taught me that some things are more valuable than all the money in the world. You taught me what it means to be truly rich." Looking around the garden where Emily played with Leo, where Anna and Charles grew flowers next to Mrs. Gable, where Buddy ran happily among the trees, Harrison knew he had found something no mining company could ever give him. A family built not on blood or money, but on love, forgiveness, and second chances. The brave girl who had saved his life on that dusty road had ended up saving his soul, teaching him that true wealth lies in the human connections we create and the sacrifices we make for those we love. And as he watched Emily draw birds in the dirt, no longer as symbols of escape, but as celebrations of freedom, Harrison knew he had finally found his way home. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you daily videos that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.